Still Wakes the Deep is like a beautiful, sad song that you can't help but listen to on repeat. The game is an alluring mix of alien isolation, The Thing, and that familiar Chinese room style of past titles that put focus on their settings and narratives above all else, though this time with a greater emphasis on player interactivity. It puts us into the shoes of Kaz McCleary, an electrician aboard an oil rig off the coast of Scotland called the Bayra. We're briefly introduced to the somewhat comforting daily life of those working the ship, but it doesn't take long before the drilling hits something unexpected and unleashes an otherworldly horror onto the crew. Anyone who has seen some of my videos before knows that I revel in being able to experience new kinds of environments in a virtual format. And that goes for places I'm familiar with, along with those that I will never visit in my lifetime. The Bayra thankfully falls into the latter category, as being on an isolated oil rig encircled by endless stormy seas is probably my own personal hell since I can't swim. Not that it would help much anyway because of the deadly freezing waters. Peering down from lofted walkways and seeing crashing waves was enough to make me feel uneasy. And the combination of harsh weather with the giant steel prison is perfectly conveyed visually and through incredibly effective sound design. Although the interiors of the Bayra can provide you with the respite of heaters, it brings its own perils with burning steam bursting from pipes, electrical hazards lingering in suffocating corridors, and facilities quickly filling with oil and water. These threats are as dangerous to you as they are to the rig itself, something you understand as you revisit areas on the rig and witness further destruction and flooding as time goes on. Many actions taken by Kaz McCleary are in efforts to prolong the integrity of the crumbling structure the survivors are stuck on, pulling levers, turning valves, and activating various technical oil rig systems that are well above his pay grade. There's some light platforming and environmental puzzles, as well as stealth segments where you pick up items around you to use as distractions. All in all, the gameplay may feel slightly repetitive, but in a way that would make sense given the character who you're playing as and the structure they're trying to maintain. Plus, there are occasional heart-pounding chase sequences and some brilliantly stressful shimmies across ledges to break things up. Unsurprisingly, the Chinese Rim have once again delivered on visuals, expertly weaving them together with the story they want to tell. Likewise, an indescribable horror has intertwined itself with the oil rig, and exploring this collapsing structure couldn't feel more like fighting your way through the belly of a beast. You must survive claustrophobic tunnels covered in pipes and frayed wires that make up the industrial intestines of the Bayra. Characters actually look like oil rig workers, and move with such convincing human fluidity that the performances effortlessly pulled me into understanding everything about them in a matter of sentences. All of which is made even more absorbing thanks to the talented voice acting on display. Still Wakes the Deep is an impressively believable look into a 1970s Scottish oil rig during an unbelievable disaster. When I started playing, I realised that I didn't know what to expect when it came to the creatures I would encounter, so when I finally did, it really packed a punch. Because of this, I highly recommend playing the game first before watching the rest of this video. Knowing as little as possible going in will benefit your experience. Overall, a playthrough is about 5 hours long, so you're more than welcome to go do your homework and come back. From this point on, I'll be discussing the game in more depth, and while I won't explicitly spoil the ending specifically, everything else is pretty much free reign, so consider this a warning to stop watching if you'd rather play the game first. The world you're dropped in feels both real and unfamiliar, and a main reason for this to me is its Scottish setting. This isn't usually a place that serves as the core of a game's experience, and often just contributes as a background for a level in most games that use it. You'd think it would be a given that a game's setting would also inform the accents of the characters who inhabit them. But a lot of the time, when it comes to horror titles I've played, everyone just has an American accent, which does tend to pull me out a little from an otherwise immersive virtual space. In contrast, Still Wakes the Deep feels much more authentic, including Scottish actors to deliver on making characters on the oil rig seem even more genuine. The language used is also affected, with words and phrases that make conversations feel almost scarily natural. And how can I forget the very satisfying swearing?
What the fuck was that?
I don't know, but the generators are that way.
Well, I'm no fucking going in there.
Have you got a better plan? No? Aye, well, I fucking didn't think you would have somehow. Fucking got on with it!
Aye, where you go then?
In fact, Still Wakes the Deep is so dedicated that there's even an achievement for playing the game with Scottish Gaelic subtitles. In addition to this, names found within the world can be associated with Celtic mythology. For example, the name of the rig is the same as that of Beira, the Queen of Winter, and the company who owns the oil rig is called Cadal, which is the Scottish Gaelic word for sleeping. Of course, this is all the more fitting due to the idea that the rig's drilling awoke something from the freezing depths beneath. Within the virtual space, there are references to British politics, football teams, and food.
Life is like football. It's not over
until the final whistle. Aye. You're a Barnsley fan, so you're pretty much fucked from the off, right?
Oh, I will see you hand for that, McCleary.
I spent way too long watching people in the canteen eat their breakfast, and grieved over mugs of tea that were left to go cold in the wake of the disaster. These injections of things that are familiar to me made me feel so much sadder when I watched them rip apart. The Chinese room already proved their skill in recreating British residential environments in Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. And despite being on an oil rig, you know, the least homely place you could possibly think of, there are pockets of coziness present that have been lovingly decorated by the workers. They're people making the best out of their surroundings, intent on not just living in a metal box. While the cosmic horror spreading across the rig is of course an expected draw for a horror game, the thing that ended up pulling me in the most was the human aspect. The individuals you come across are surprisingly memorable from short conversations, and one of my favourite parts was snooping inside the cabins at the beginning to further learn more about Kaz's crewmates. Desks are filled with cards and letters from loved ones. Photos of family members are pinned to the walls, and even Christmas decorations are hung around the various surrounding rooms. Speaking of, that makes Still Wakes the Deep another good choice for festive horror alongside Parasite Eve and Blue Stinger, for instance. Watching Kaz rub his hands up against heaters felt strangely palpable, as if the warmth was emanating through my screen. Which it probably was because my chunky monitors output a lot of heat, but that's besides the point. What I'm trying to stress is that the audio design is brilliant, and in watching the devlogs that the Chinese room posted on their channel, I saw that they made a metal sculpture appropriately named the rig to recreate those metallic clunking and creaking sounds, which were also utilised in the game's emotional score. The music evokes a sense of terrifying beauty alongside a feeling of underlying sadness. It's the perfect accompaniment to the piercing loneliness of a playthrough, regardless of how many crew members you come across throughout. Kaz McCleary's professional role as a worker aboard the Beira is integral to the gameplay experience. You've got levers, fire extinguishers, valves, ladders, and fuse boxes under your purview. There are so many of these interactions, it does actually feel like you're doing a day's work on the rig, though with unusual Lovecraftian horrors and immense structural damage. It brings about some exhilarating sequences, particularly when you have to make your way along the flare stack and parts that are barely hanging on to their foundations. Throughout all these adrenaline-pumping segments, it's clear that our protagonist is just a normal guy, grunting, swearing, and screaming with every terrifying jump and fall he's forced to endure. Everything is working against you, including the crewmates who have been changed. Former colleagues are turned into splatters of disfigured flesh, warped and unwrapped in a way that you could see as a kind of macabre art form. Oftentimes though, they've been turned into something much worse due to the strange substance that has taken over the rig. Some of the least explicit moments end up being the most haunting, like how near the start of the incident we stumble across someone stuck inside a diving bell that's been hoisted up. The ceaseless clanging and violent swaying of the vessel, along with the screams of its prisoner sounding like they're compressed by a metal fist, left a lot to the imagination, which was even more chilling. The same goes for other parts of the game too. You'll hear the distant howls and cries of your colleagues sometimes long before you even see where they're coming from. Although you'll be the subject of the hissing and spitting of rage-filled words, occasionally you'll hear the last vestige of pitiable humanity that resides within the fleshy monstrosities. It's a reminder that our protagonist isn't the only one who yearns to return to the comforts of their home, and that sentiment was already present for everyone there even before disaster struck. When close by to the eldritch horror growth or its previously human hosts, a surreal oily effect will appear on screen indicating their direction. And other times that same bizarre vision will stain memories and voices replaying in Kaz's mind. It provides a stinging flush of homesickness that you can't help but feel yourself. The events on the oil rig are a test of courage for McCleary, who escaped the mainland to flee from the consequences of his past actions, that being a possible prison sentence. But in doing so, he leaves behind his wife and children. However, during the game he doesn't flee, or rather any attempts to escape at the start are made futile.
No!
Instead venturing into the most dangerous parts of the rig in an attempt to fight against the odds. He displays bravery in the face of something horrific and incomprehensible, still continuing his work in the eye of the storm out of necessity for survival. He is not the only one, as numerous other crew members put their lives at risk to work together through it too, holding on to that same hope of returning to their families. The workers aboard the Beira leave their homes and loved ones for their livelihood, though for Kaz the motivations were slightly more selfish, even if he denies that with his own excuses near the beginning. The game explores the resilience and selflessness of those ordinary workers, as well as the unpredictable and merciless destruction of the stormy seas. The horror from the deep is an extension of these dangers, but also brings about echoes of voices from people they care about. The beauty and warmth brought by the humans on board brings so much weight to the tragedy, and a poem called The Trawlermen that you can find in your journey immaculately encompasses the game's sentiment, so I'll end this video with a reading of it. From o'er the Fulmar, huddled close together in flock against the winter brine, black shine the stone of echoed sounds, home to yellow lights of trawlers strayed and bound. By heavy midnight calm upon the shoals of cold north singing, old Beira's grip upon the tiller, down below the faded boards and hand-smooth tokens speak of scrabbles lost and won. The morning watcher turns her gaze to sea, where terns spill the clouds, and her charges slumber on beneath their blankets spun of shingled home. We do not miss you, precious weans, though as we sleep waves break the bow. Though storms gather beneath the brow of winter, and woolen gathers now the clouds, and still wakes the deep, and still on we plough.